I'm honored and pleased and smitten to be able to introduce these two people to you. One of whom I just met by hitting on the knee, and the other who I've had maybe 2 conversations with, but those conversations are lovely, and they were important, and they shaped me and my thinking for you. And if I mess up how I say your name, just fix me, both of you. Beretta Gamillion and Ara Rael. Yeah. Are from this, I have notes because I have to read it. Are from the Center for Human Services. Beretta has been leading the agency for 26 years as the executive director, and has worked in nonprofit behavioral health for 45 years. Give it up. That's not looking for safe space, y'all. That's having courage, right? That's having courage. Beretta has often described what she does as her life work. And so for that life commitment, we're grateful. Ara is the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging Manager at the Center for Human Services. And as you heard Ara talk yesterday, they just celebrated their first year anniversary. So just so sweet, right? And Ara describes themselves, and you heard this too, as a newcomer to the nonprofit behavioral health and DEIB field. But also you heard Ara speaking this morning and trying to put all of those passions into the language of hope. So being passionate about building the bridges and seeing the bridges and figuring out how to make those bridges. So I don't need to blather on anymore. They're going to talk. They'll do whatever they're going to do with you. Have a great time.
Thank you. It was described that we went from nothingness to somethingness, okay? Actually, through the years, we made our efforts, we thought we made our efforts to do this kind of work. We had a diversity committee. You ever heard of that? Then it was an equity team. And then it was this, and then it was that. And it was all just window dressing. We realized a couple of years back that we weren't doing anything transformative about this work. We needed to basically start over. It's more than just somebody coming in and doing a training, So here's my notes. What I believe happened, I see as 3 different things that's contributed to our success so far. The first thing that needed to happen was that leadership needed to do their own personal work, okay? A couple of years ago, I began working with a DEIB coach. Still doing it to this day. I have a lot of stuff to work with, We brought in consultants to work with our leadership team, and we've been doing that for over a year. And we're doing it like 2 hours a week, every other week. And now we're probably going to go to a little less than that for this coming year. But we've done a lot of hard work. And that's the thing that I think that a lot of people don't realize is it is hard work, from a personal level as well as a professional level. Then we were able to offer our leadership team individual coaches themselves, So we did our personal work. It's got to start from the top, okay? Next is that you've got to be willing to make an investment. And it's an investment of time. It's an investment of money. Paying for such things as consultants and coaches and the time that it takes to pull staff away to do this work and to do it right, it's not cheap, And I've been asked, how did you afford to hire a DEIB manager? And we didn't. We couldn't afford that. We took that money from reserves to do it because it was that kind of priority to us. Okay, but we believe, I sincerely believe, that in the long run, it will save us money because we will be able to hire staff and we'll be able to retain staff much better. Okay, and then the third element that I think was just absolutely crucial in our work is that we decided that we would hire a full-time DEIB manager. Okay, this person, all right, reports directly to me, and she's a member of our leadership team. So what we're trying to do is ingrain DEIB work into everything we do. We tried to do it by having, somebody in one job that would hold those responsibilities, but what's their real job? We needed somebody that this is all they thought about, that would remind us and teach us to look at DEIB issues in every decision we make, in everything that we do. And I personally believe that that's got to be somebody that's their entire dedicated job. Okay, that's one of the things that made us successful. I'm going to turn it over to you, all right, and you can tell them about what you do.
Oh gosh! First off, thank you for leading us into that. Thank you for doing this. Is all I'm going to say. A little nervous up here, y'all. What do I do? Yeah, just to jump off of what Beretta was saying, this is all I do. This is all I do. And it's overwhelming at times. And I think it's really easy to see like me up here and me and Beretta up here and be like, oh, Aura's doing all this work and these ideas and stuff, as if it exists in a vacuum. And it did not. It's not like the DEIB journey started at CHS like when I got hired. It was like years in the making, years of trial and error to get to a point. And I actually wanted to ask if you could you like pinpoint like a moment where you're like, oh, this is like, we need to take that next step. We need to like invest in a full-time DEIB person. Could you like, do you recall like, oh, this is like, it flipped a switch?
Yeah, there wasn't really a moment that I would say, but it was definitely a build-up, and frankly, I got to the place where it's like, I don't know if I'm going to make it through this work. I needed help. And so I had my personal coach, then I needed somebody in the agency that was also that person.
I think that's really important to take note of as well. That's like, when I came in, I was like, oh, I always associated, and I think a lot of folks do as well, it's like what happened in 2020 with COVID and George Floyd, the racial reckoning, BLM, all that. I thought that was what kind of like, oh, that stuff happened, and so they decided to hire for a DEIB person. And it wasn't until I started talking to Beretta and really kind of looking back into the history of CHS, it's like, oh no, this was years in the making of foundational work of I think we might do this and then I think we might not. And so if anything, I would encourage folks to look internally and be like, what are the things, don't be afraid to try. And I think that's one thing that really resonated with me, specifically with working at CHS, because as everyone here has heard, I just celebrated my 1-year anniversary. If you look at my resume, nothing at all to be like, oh, that person, DEIB manager material, nothing. I didn't look good on paper. And so I recognized as a BIPOC person who was doing this in their lived experience, they were taking a chance on me and I was taking a chance on them. And that was scary, y'all. And I will preface this that all of this happened in late 2021. So when the Great Resignation was happening, right? So that wave of this would be a good time to kind of shift into a field that I actually want to work in. And like I shared yesterday, I saw the job posting and I just felt so compelled. I felt so compelled because it resonated so deeply. And you had the core values on I checked out that website, I checked out the Glassdoor, I looked at all the leadership people, all their photos, before I even applied, because I I had spent so much of my life talking myself out of just even taking the risk, like taking the opportunity. And then I put my resume together, and then I wrote that cover letter, and to this day, it is one of the best things I've ever written. And it holds up. I recently revisited it, and it still holds up. I was so proud of it. And I remember I wrote the cover letter, and I read it to my wife, Joy, and I'm reading it out loud, and I kept saying in the middle of it, I was just like, oh, I'm gonna get this job. And then I would like read another paragraph out loud. It's like, oh yeah, no, they're definitely gonna hire me. And yeah, eventually they did. So going off of that, looking back into how I was hired and all of that, I'm gonna ask you like a pretty vulnerable question. And I'm sure you already answered this, but I probably forgot. Why me? Like what was it? If you could pick like a quality that you were specifically looking for, that you felt the agency needed, that would work well, would be a good fit for CHS, which has over 50-year history. Why did you pick the person who, on paper, great cover letter, what was it? Like, it's like, because I'm like, why would you take a chance on me?
It was that cover letter. No, I'm kidding. I honestly don't remember the cover letter now. Yeah. I think that it was more of a soul thing. When we did the interview with she walked in the door and I felt a connection immediately. Immediately I knew that she was doing her own personal work on this. Immediately I knew that was her passion. It wasn't just because she was an Asian queer person. It was because of that passion and that work she was doing. It was an easy choice. Pretty good one too, I think.
Okay. I swear I didn't ask that just to stroke my ego. That was not an ego-stroking question. Yeah. I genuinely wonder. And that the insecurities and the self-doubts in this role, y'all, like the therapy I've gone through, the coaching I've gone through, the weekly supervisions, my leadership team asking about me, all of that contributed to like the success that we are, and I'm going to call it a success. I think we are successful in like actually like integrating DEIB in all that we do, but there's so much that I had to face internally when I was doing this work, and I was not prepared. I went in and be like, I have some ideas in trainings and blah, 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 and all of that, but I came in and I very quickly realized that the content wasn't what was needed. I wasn't coming into like a blank slate. The folks who worked at CHS was like, they had the basics down: implicit bias, anti-racism. They had consultants. Like the foundation it wasn't like level 101. And I realized that the number one thing that I had to really center was the well-being of our staff. Like I came in and it was just, I could feel the hard that CHS had been going through in the last few years, from COVID to going to remote, to going to all of a sudden racial reckoning, to the equity team, to eventually hiring me. And I realized it's like we needed to learn how to talk to each other again. We needed to heal. We needed to build capacity. We needed to address the burnout before we could even get to talking about implicit bias or anti-racism. And so the first thing I actually did at CHS, I'm actually really proud of it, was my main thing was talking about emotional language and definition. I screened all of Brene Brown's Atlas of the Heart with like pretty much the entire like CHS like agency. It's like 4 departments that got to see that entire series. And we talked about compassion and empathy and creating psychologically safe spaces. And I added the B. I was a DEI manager. I added the B later on, like 2-3 months in, and I think that's really important that first off, you didn't poo-poo it. You're just like, oh yeah, you want to change your title? Absolutely, 2-3 months in, yeah, go for it. And when I added the B,
I thought the B stood for Beretta.
I wanted to call my program the Debbie program, DEBI, but DEI is more like on brand, like people recognize. Yeah, but diversity, equity, inclusion, and Beretta, it's all about her. I added the belonging because I realized that's what we were missing. We were missing that we don't just want you to be here. We want you to show up as yourselves. Inclusivity to me means making the space. So we made the space. Everyone can come and work for us. We made the space. We're trying to change the policies. We're trying to do the thing. But unless you actually broadcast, no, we're centering belonging. We're centering you showing up as authentically as you can. You showing up as vulnerable as you can. And I'm not asking us, and making it really clear, this doesn't mean we're your family. We are not the CHS family. I hate that. I'm sorry. I really dislike that term, because we're not a family. Family is dysfunctional. Family has hard boundaries. We're a community, and we're a large community. We are the CHS community, and that means we can still show up for each other, but we have professional boundaries. So, which was such a big shift. Anyways, I feel like I'm taking up. I'll keep going. Okay. But I really wanted to highlight just what Beretta was saying: the commitment, the time, the investment. You're going to have to put resources. And wow, guess what? There's a project submittal. There's a submission thing that we can all do as part of the collaborative network in Northtown ACH resources. So I hope that y'all go back and take a look, because resources are available, and I encourage everybody to see how we can utilize it. Please take the opportunity. Little bump for Northtown ACH. But what I really want to emphasize before I leave here is, like I said, there was so much therapy and coaching and support, and all of that was, if you are going to hire a DEIB person, 1 point person, and very specifically if they are BIPOC, queer, or from a historically excluded community, you're going to have to, as an organization, learn how to protect them, learn how to support them, especially if what you want them to do is spread their wings and really get as big. I came in and I was my mentality was, how long is this leash? What a mentality to go into a new job and be how long is the leash? How far can I go? But imagine the mentality of having something that someone could just pull back. I didn't want to lose my job, but also I wasn't going to waste my time if the leash wasn't long. And so what I did want to point out that one very specific moment from last year where it was a fork in the road, y'all. This was it. This was oh, you pulled from reserves. You hired a DEIB manager. You did all the things. You put me in leadership. You haven't shut down any of my ideas. You encouraged me to join and be out there in the community, which I was very much encouraged to be hey, check this out, check this out. And so what I wanted to highlight was one very specific experience here in the city of Linwood. Pretty much all of CHS knows this, and if you search for Aura in Linwood, I'm sure y'all will find this. But so I applied for the City of Linwood's DEI commission. I wanted to be a commissioner because I wanted to volunteer. I wanted to spend an hour and a half of my month hanging out with cool folks, like-minded folks, and Beretta encouraged me to apply. So I did. And it was not good. It was terrible. We laugh about it now, but it was terrible, everybody. And I say this with all the love I have for this city. I'm still a commissioner. In fact, I just got voted as vice chair of the DEI commission. And I love my city, but I'm not going to shy away from how badly I was treated by some of my city leaders. That's holding them accountable. Very long story short, they essentially just, they marginalized me. They excluded me. There were some agendas from some of the city council members who saw me as a threat. And I think that's the best way I can put it. And it was terrible. It happened I applied in January, and the whole process got started in March. And I went to a city council meeting with the expectation of being appointed. And instead, and I got dressed up, my wife was there, we looked way cute, so cute. And I stood there and I waited, and they pushed through these two older white gentlemen for these other commissions thinking I was next. And they spent the next 45 to an hour talking about me as if I wasn't in the room, did not give me an opportunity to speak, and they voted to not vote. They voted to not vote for me, and they voted to postpone it in a month. Right? Never in the history, this is a tall order. I was but I've had city staff be that's never happened before. How they treated you was not the norm. Especially, y'all, if you have a plumbers club and there's a plumber who wants to join, wouldn't you want the plumber to join because they're an expert in plumbing instead of just a plumbing fan club? Don't you want the DEIB professional to be in the DEI? Like that, I feel like that makes sense, right? It's like, this is my work, this is my job. And you don't want me here because I live 1,200 feet away from the city limits. That was the reason. And so I went to that meeting, felt incredibly excluded. It was so public. It was incredibly humiliating. And it's like, they're like, come back another month. And I stayed up all night. And the next day, funny enough, was a leadership meeting. I will always remember this. And we were doing it via Zoom, so I'm in my office, and I'm like nervous and scared because this was like the first time I was like, I'm representing CHS. Like, it got so public and so out of hand so quickly. And I'm just like, I'm gonna get fired. They're gonna tell me to like, back away right now. You need to step away from this. This is bad publicity. All of these terrible things were running through my mind. All of it. And so I get to the leadership meeting, it's a Zoom thing, and we're doing check-ins. And I'm just like, so I need to tell y'all this, and I just burst into tears. And I think this was like the first time y'all have seen me cry in a Zoom meeting, but I burst into tears, and I was like, I am so sorry. This is really hard. And even now, it's like, I want to talk more about it. I couldn't even talk about it afterwards. The experience left me so... It's one thing to feel internally I don't belong. It's another to have your city leaders tell you, hey, you're 1,200 feet away from belonging. And that's not the reason. It's another to have oh, you are someone with power to tell me you don't actually belong. And I just burst into tears. Anyways, I'm having a hard time recalling it a little bit, but this is why it's so important for me to tell this story, because I'm in that leadership meeting with the little box, and all I see are the leadership team just immediately their faces were what is happening? How can I support you? Some of them started I saw some people getting teary-eyed. Some of them were like, oh my gosh, what is happening? Immediately getting all these things of support. And that was equally overwhelming. And it was, and I'm just gonna skip ahead to the next month. They tried to change the rules in the middle, by the way. Oh yeah. So I'm gonna skip to the next month, and it was just the following month was a lead up. Ara, what do you need? Me sending out communications to the rest of CHS, Beretta telling me the board was behind me. And they all showed up the next month. Beretta came, made a public comment. Leadership either showed up in person, had some mental health folks who came in, just stood for support. Some made public comments on Zoom, they sent in emails. There was such a turnout for the following month. And I don't think without that pressure, I would have actually gotten appointed to the DEI Commission. Now, I share this story, and I share this vulnerability, and I'm sharing the hard with y'all because that was a moment. When push came to shove, when CHS as leadership, they could have yanked that leash back and been that's too much, Ara. We don't need you giving us a bad name. When they could have just talked the talk and be let's redirect your energies. They stood beside me, they uplifted me, they checked in on me, they supported me, they protected me. And so what ended up being one of the most marginalizing, excluding, racially traumatizing, public, humiliating moment of my life turned into one of my biggest moments of belonging, turned into one of oh, people do want to stand up and hold me. And I realized, that was the moment I realized I didn't actually have a leash. I was imagining the leash on me, thinking that Beretta was holding it, and it never existed. And really from that point on, it was I can get as big as I want. And so that moment was so pivotal. It didn't because it didn't happen at work. It wasn't we were looking at policies, we were looking at systems. I'm doing a community thing, I'm volunteering, they messed with me. Are you gonna stand up and have my back? And unequivocally, the answer was oh, absolutely. Tell me what to do. That's how an organization, that's how an executive director, that's how a leadership team over there who created the foundation for all this, that's how you show up, and that is brave. And that is scary. And that's putting your public reputation on the line. And so I want to say thank you. If I can have like an opportunity to say thank you to my leadership, and also a shout out to our HR manager, Mersada, who I absolutely adore. I think there's a lot of like DEIB versus HR, but like I love our HR manager, and I love our HR admin. Like, it's a good relationship. We're parallel, and I love it. But yeah, shout out to CHS leadership and the staff and just the vulnerability. And I've talked on forever and ever. And so, like, thank you, Beretta.
It was just the right thing to do.
But how hard is that? What made it the right thing to do? Why did that align with CHS, very specifically?
Jeez. You know, when you see an injustice, you feel it in the pit of your stomach. You just know it. And you want to be able to do something about it. Well, we could. We can mobilize. We can do things about injustice. And it may have not changed systems, but at least we said, we're not going to take it. This is not okay. And I think that for too long, we have just sat back and not said anything and just let it happen. We may have noticed it. We may have talked about it, but you got to put yourself out there. It's all about vulnerability, and I don't know, I don't think we had a choice. There was nothing else to do but support you.
I love that. Can I just say I really like that answer? It's like, one of the things we really do at CHS is we center race and social justice. That's always been one of the things. How do we center race and social justice? And I think just by showing up in that way, it's like we didn't have a choice, because that's one of the things we wanted to do. We wanted to center race and social. Guess what? I needed it. I needed the support. I needed that extra boost, that uplifting. And then afterwards, I needed the healing. And so it's like I talk about the pivotal point, but the road afterwards was hard. And kind of shifting back into our relationship. So Beretta and I have weekly supervisions, like for an hour, sometimes a little over an hour. I can talk a lot, if you couldn't tell. We just sit and we talk, and I update and do all these things. And Beretta, you really, very early on, taught me to keep an eye on myself, to make sure I didn't burn out. And that kind of care, and it wasn't just from Beretta. That was like the direct supervision, but from like the rest, and just CHS staff. It's like, we want you to go far, we want you to do good work, but not to the point where you can no longer do it. And that, I didn't, how do I say this? It was through my interactions and through my work as a DEIB manager that I managed to get to a point where I gave myself permission to forgive myself and give myself permission to heal from things I didn't even realize were hurting me, that I had internalized and I was carrying on my shoulders. And I felt like working with you and working alongside and just being a part of such an amazing team, the pedigree, my goodness, I didn't realize how in bad shape I was. I thought I was ready, but I was in pretty bad shape when I came in. And through my work in the last year, I've been able to heal, like genuinely, deeply, internally heal from a lot of the traumas that systemically had been poured on top of me and encapsulated every fiber of my DNA. That sounds really deep. But thank God for therapy. Thank God for coaching. Thank God for supervision. Thank God for community. Because my goodness, I could not do this work without the healing. And so that's another way. You really want this to work? You want to support your DEIB, whatever it looks like, equity, belonging? You have to give them resources in order for them to heal, in order for them to work through their own internalized traumas, because we cannot do this work without addressing that harm. And it was scary. because I had suppressed it for like my entire life.
And I think that what that has allowed us to do now in this conversation is to go for full circle. So I think that we can end this, and you can have questions if you want, but we can end this by saying, just as I started saying, you've got to start by doing your own work. You know?
Oh, good job.